You've probably heard of Pompeii, that tragic Roman city frozen in time by volcanic ash, where every street and fresco tells a story of sudden catastrophe. But what if I told you that deep in the Aegean highlands, laser technology has just revealed an entire Bronze Age village that vanished without fire, without earthquake, without any trace of violence whatsoever? A settlement where every home was carefully sealed from the inside, where valuable bronze tools were left hanging on walls, and where not a single skeleton has ever been found. Welcome to one of archaeology's most unsettling discoveries, a place where cutting-edge LiDAR scanning has pulled back the curtain on a mystery that has no business existing in our rational, evidence-based understanding of the ancient world. This is the story of communities that defy explanation, of advanced civilizations that disappeared mid-sentence, of artifacts so precise they challenge everything we thought we knew about prehistoric technology. Over the next hour, you and I are going to walk through archaeological sites that keep professional researchers awake at night. We're talking about places where the evidence contradicts itself, where every answer spawns three new questions, where even the most conservative archaeologists start speaking in hushed tones about possibilities they'd never put in a peer-reviewed journal. These aren't your typical lost city stories. These are thoroughly excavated, meticulously documented sites where the strangeness isn't in what we haven't found. It's in what we have found, and what those findings refuse to tell us. You're going to meet cultures that possessed knowledge they shouldn't have had, that built with precision that shouldn't have been possible, that vanished in ways that shouldn't have happened. What makes these mysteries so compelling isn't just their age or their scale. It's the fact that modern technology, ground-penetrating radar, isotope analysis, satellite imaging, DNA sequencing, has only made them stranger. The more we learn, the less sense it makes. The better our tools become, the more the ancient world seems to recede from our grasp, leaving us with handfuls of data that assemble into patterns we can describe but cannot explain. So settle in, because we're about to tour the margins of archaeological knowledge, those uncomfortable spaces where expertise meets humility and where we don't know is the most honest answer science can give. Keep your skepticism sharp and your wonder sharper. You're going to need both. The Kalivos Terrace complex sits on a wind-scraped plateau in northern Thessaly, Greece, and it represents one of the most meticulously abandoned settlements ever discovered in the Bronze Age Mediterranean. When LiDAR scans first passed over this region in 2018, they revealed something extraordinary beneath centuries of accumulated soil and wild rosemary. A perfectly gridded village of 47 structures, each one systematically closed and sealed sometime around 1680 BCE, with doorways blocked by carefully mortared stones and windows filled with packed clay. No ash layers indicate fire. No skeletal trauma suggests violence. No scattered belongings hint at hasty flight. Instead, excavations between 2019 and 2023 have uncovered dwelling after dwelling where bronze implements remained hung on their pegs, where ceramic storage jars stood in neat rows, still sealed with beeswax, where looms held half-finished textiles with the weaving weights still in position. It's as if the entire population decided, collectively and calmly, to pack their most precious belongings, secure every building from the inside, which is architecturally bizarre since it requires someone to remain within to set the final sealing stones, and then simply vanish from the archaeological record. The scale of the site suggests a community of 300 to 400 people, organized into extended family compounds that radiate from a central courtyard measuring 38 meters across. Pottery analysis indicates active trade connections with Minoan Crete to the south, evidenced by imported stirrup jars containing residues of saffron and olive oil, and with the mainland Mycenaean centers to the east, shown through distinctive Vafeo-style cups and bronze daggers with inlaid gold hilts. Radiocarbon dating from charcoal in cooking hearths, combined with ceramic typology, places the final occupation phase firmly in the late Helladic Wadent period, contemporary with the early shaft graves at Mycenae. What's remarkable is the absence of any decline phase. Most Bronze Age settlements show layers of gradual abandonment, decreasing pottery quality, shrinking inhabited areas, accumulating trash in formerly clean spaces. Kalivos shows none of this. One season, it's a thriving agricultural center, processing sheep wool and growing emmer wheat in the surrounding terraces, and the next season it's sealed up tighter than a pharaoh's tomb. Here's where the evidence starts pulling in contradictory directions. Theory 1. The community received advance warning of some disaster. Perhaps earthquake activity, perhaps drought indicators, perhaps political upheaval, and executed a planned, orderly evacuation. This would explain the careful sealing and the absence of valuable goods. Theory 2. The inhabitants were part of a religious movement that required periodic mass relocation, possibly tied to astronomical events or prophetic revelation, with the sealing representing a ritual prohibition against returning to the site. Theory 3, favored by a minority of researchers examining pollen data and erosion patterns, suggests a rapid environmental collapse, perhaps a spring failure or landslide that contaminated the water supply, forcing the community to relocate while maintaining the fiction of eventual return through the elaborate sealing ritual. Theory 4, which nobody publishes, but everyone whispers about at conferences, is that we're looking at evidence of forced relocation by a more powerful authority who wanted the appearance of voluntary departure for political or religious reasons. But here's where folklore crashes into archaeology, like a storm wave against a breakwater. Local Greek traditions from the Ottoman period, recorded by British travelers in the 1820s, speak of the sealed villages of the giants, abandoned settlements in the northern mountains where supernatural beings lived until they were called back to the underworld by Hades himself. The oral tradition describes these giants as master builders who could carry stones no mortal could lift, and who possessed knowledge of metalworking that produced bronze that sang when struck and never dulled. When 19th century antiquarians dismissed these tales as peasant superstition, they couldn't have known that 21st century excavators would find, in Structure 23 of the Kolivos complex, a bronze double axe weighing 14 kilograms, far too heavy for practical use by an average human, with an edge that metallurgical analysis shows was work-hardened, using a technique not documented elsewhere in Bronze Age Greece, producing a Vickers hardness rating comparable to modern tool steel. The axe bears no decoration, no religious symbolism, just brutal functionality. Who was meant to wield it? And why leave it behind if it represented such advanced craft knowledge? Picture yourself standing in the central courtyard of Kalivos on a dawn in 1680 BCE. The limestone paving stones still damp with night dew, smoke beginning to rise from morning cooking fires in 47 hearths simultaneously. You hear the clatter of looms, the bleating of sheep being moved to pasture, children's voices calling across the compound. Then picture that same courtyard 6 months later, absolutely silent, every doorway blocked, every window sealed, every fire cold, with not a soul remaining and not a single body left behind to mark what happened. The sheer organizational capacity required to orchestrate such a departure suggests a level of social cohesion and authoritative control that challenges our models of Bronze Age Aegean society as a collection of semi-autonomous farming communities. Someone or something commanded enough respect or fear to convince an entire village to execute this elaborate closure ritual, and then disappear completely from the region's archaeological footprint. What haunts researchers most is the possibility that Kalivos isn't unique, that it's simply the first of its kind to be detected by LiDAR survey, and that similar sealed settlements might dot the highlands all across the prehistoric Aegean, hidden beneath thorn bushes and shepherd's trails, waiting for the right technology to expose them. If the Calivos pattern repeats, and preliminary surveys suggest at least 3 other potential sites within 50 kilometers showing similar topographic signatures, then we're not looking at a single, inexplicable event, but at a widespread cultural phenomenon that we've completely missed in our understanding of Bronze Age population dynamics. We still don't know where these people went, why they sealed their homes so meticulously, or what the 14-kilogram bronze axe was really for. And every new excavation season at Calivos produces more data that sharpens the mystery rather than resolving it. The Decalia salt pans on Cyprus's southeastern coast have been harvested for sea salt continuously since at least the Bronze Age, but in 2020, marine archaeologists surveying for ancient harbor works made an unexpected discovery 12 meters below the modern waterline. A submerged causeway of dressed limestone blocks stretching 340 meters from the current shoreline out into the Mediterranean, terminating at a circular platform 36 meters in diameter that now rests in water too deep for ancient ships to have used as a conventional dock. Subsequent underwater excavation and photogrammetric modeling revealed that the platform dates to approximately 2300 BCE, placing it firmly in the early Bronze Age, centuries before Cyprus developed significant maritime trade networks. More puzzling still, the platform's surface is scored with a geometric pattern of intersecting grooves, each groove precisely 7 centimeters wide and 3 centimeters deep, arranged in a radial pattern emanating from a central stone boss. Wear patterns indicate these grooves saw repeated use. Something was dragged or rolled along them with enough frequency to polish the limestone. But no artifacts have been found in the surrounding sediment to indicate what that something might have been. Sea level reconstructions based on coral terracing and sediment core analysis indicate that in 2300 BCE, this platform would have stood on dry land, approximately 200 meters inland from the contemporary shoreline, positioned at the edge of the salt pans. This creates an immediate chronological puzzle. The platform predates Cyprus's integration into the Eastern Mediterranean trade networks by at least 400 years, yet its construction required organizational capacity and labor investment on a scale usually associated with palatial authorities. Stone sourcing studies using petrographic analysis show the limestone was quarried from the Pentadactylos Range, 48 kilometers to the north, meaning someone coordinated the extraction, transport, and precise shaping of approximately 800 tons of stone, then assembled it into a structure whose purpose remains completely opaque to modern interpretation. The closest contemporary parallel in the Eastern Mediterranean is the ceremonial platform at Byblos in Lebanon, but that structure is clearly associated with temple architecture and mortuary ritual, whereas the Decalia platform shows no evidence of burning, libation, burial, or any other religious activity. Theory 1, advanced by maritime archaeologists, suggests the platform was a proto-harbor installation, perhaps for beaching ships or for ceremonial embarkation, later submerged by post-glacial sea level rise. But this runs into immediate problems. Bronze Age ships in the Eastern Mediterranean typically drew less than a meter of water and were beached directly on sandy shores. There's no technological or practical reason to construct such an elaborate stone platform for that purpose in 2300 BCE. Theory 2, favored by some archaeoastronomers, proposes the grooves functioned as a massive astronomical calculator or observational instrument, with the radial pattern used to track solar, lunar, or stellar positions. The central boss does align within 2 degrees with true north, and sight lines along certain grooves correspond to solstice sunrise azimuths. However, no Bronze Age culture in the Eastern Mediterranean is known to have developed astronomical instrumentation at this level of sophistication, and Cyprus specifically shows no other evidence of advanced astronomical knowledge until the Iron Age. Theory 3, which appears increasingly in specialist literature, is that the platform was used for salt processing or brine evaporation with the grooves channeling seawater, but the dimensions and wear patterns don't match those of known ancient salt-working technologies. Now we enter the realm where archaeology shades into local legend. Cypriot folklore, recorded by medieval chroniclers, speaks of the Tide Watchers, a pre-Greek population of the island who could predict storms weeks in advance and who built star stones at the water's edge to guide ships through darkness. These Tide Watchers were said to be descended from the survivors of a great flood, and they supposedly possessed secret knowledge of sea currents and celestial navigation that allowed them to travel to distant lands and return with exotic goods before any other Mediterranean culture had developed blue water sailing capacity. The chroniclers dismissed this as mythic prehistory, but the Deucalion platform's sophisticated construction and its enigmatic purpose have reopened questions about pre-Hellenic maritime capability in the eastern Mediterranean. More tantalizingly, lead isotope analysis of copper ingots recovered from early Bronze Age contexts at inland Cypriot sites shows a small percentage originated not from Cypriot sources, but from ore bodies in Sardinia and southern Iberia, regions that conventional models place completely outside Bronze Age Cypriot trade networks. Someone was moving copper across the Mediterranean at an unexpectedly early date, and the Deucalion platform sits precisely where a maritime culture focused on long-distance exchange might construct a specialized facility. Imagine standing on the Deucalion platform on a summer midnight in 2300 BCE, the Mediterranean stretching black and star-strewn to the southern horizon, the grooves beneath your feet still warm from the day's sun. You watch as robed figures move methodically along the radial lines, perhaps placing markers, perhaps performing calculations, perhaps enacting a ceremony whose meaning has been lost for 43 centuries. You hear the lap of waves against the causeway stones and smell the salt from the nearby pans mixing with the smoke of ritual fires burning somewhere inland. What were they measuring? What were they tracking? What knowledge justified the enormous investment of labor to quarry, transport, and shape hundreds of tons of stone into this precise geometric form? The platform sits mute beneath the waves, its grooves worn smooth by something we cannot identify, its purpose resistant to every analytical tool we've deployed. Recent geophysical surveys using marine magnetometry have detected at least 6 similar structures, all now submerged, distributed along Cyprus's southern and eastern coasts at intervals of approximately 30 kilometers, suggesting a network of related installations rather than a single anomalous construction. If these prove to be contemporary with Deucalion, and preliminary ceramic finds from 2 sites suggest they are, then we're looking at a coordinated island-wide system of unknown purpose, built by a culture that has left almost no other architectural or textual evidence. The implications for early Bronze Age Cypriot society are staggering. Instead of the scattered farming villages described in standard archaeological syntheses, we need to envision a centralized authority capable of planning and executing massive stoneworking projects across multiple sites, possessing technical knowledge about marine engineering that appears nowhere else in the Eastern Mediterranean for another millennium. We still don't know what the grooves measured, where the technical knowledge came from, or what happened to the culture that built these enigmatic platforms before they vanished from Cyprus's archaeological record as abruptly as the Kalivos villagers disappeared from their sealed Thessalian compounds. The Dermator ice caves in Montenegro's Dinaric Alps present a different category of mystery altogether, one rooted not in monumental construction, but in the preservation of organic materials that simply should not exist at this latitude and altitude. In 2016, speleologists exploring a newly opened chamber in the Shuplia Njiva cave system at 2,240 meters elevation discovered a sealed ice lens containing 6 remarkably preserved human bodies arranged in a circular pattern each body wrapped in layers of linen textile dyed with a Tyrian purple so vivid it appears freshly applied. Radiocarbon dating of the linen and collagen from the bodies returned dates clustering tightly around 1450 BCE, making these individuals contemporary with the late Bronze Age collapse that devastated the eastern Mediterranean. But here's the immediate problem. Tyrian purple, the legendary dye extracted from murex sea snails, was one of the most valuable commodities in the ancient world, produced almost exclusively in Phoenician coastal workshops and reserved for royal or religious use. Finding it in a remote alpine cave, applied to burial shrouds for individuals whose bone isotope analysis indicates they lived their entire lives in the Balkans with no detectable periods of residence in coastal regions, is roughly equivalent to finding an Egyptian pharaoh's crown in a Swedish peat bog. The bodies themselves present further anomalies. Computed tomography scanning reveals that 5 of the 6 individuals stood between 188 and 197 centimeters tall, exceptionally large for Bronze Age populations anywhere in Europe, where average male stature rarely exceeded 165 centimeters. The 6th individual, positioned at the circle's center, reached an estimated 211 centimeters, placing them in the 99.99th percentile for height in any ancient population yet studied. Bone density analysis shows none of the pathologies associated with gigantism or acromegaly. These were proportionally normal humans who simply happened to be extraordinarily tall. Dental examination reveals remarkably low rates of caries and enamel hypoplasia, suggesting a high-quality diet rich in protein and low in carbohydrates, unusual for inland Bronze Age communities that typically relied heavily on cultivated grains. Skeletal analysis shows extensive muscle attachment sites on the upper body, particularly the shoulders and arms, indicating a lifetime of heavy labor or specialized physical training. Yet none of the bodies displays the traumatic injuries, healed fractures, osteoarthritis, vertebral compression, that you'd expect from a lifetime of agricultural work or heavy construction. Archaeological context around the burial provides few answers and many more questions. The ice lens that preserved the bodies formed when ancient groundwater, seeping through the cave's limestone matrix, froze in a persistent cold snap, creating a natural deep freeze that has maintained temperatures between -2 and 0 degrees Celsius for over 3 millennia. But the burial chamber was intentionally constructed. Someone carved a rectangular niche into the cave wall, large enough to accommodate all 6 bodies in their circular arrangement, and then sealed the niche with a fitted limestone slab before the ice formed. Mineralogical analysis of the slab shows it originated from outside the cave, quarried from an outcrop 10 kilometers distant. So someone carried a shaped stone slab weighing approximately 300 kilograms up a 2,240-meter mountain through cave passages that require technical climbing skills to navigate even with modern equipment in order to seal a burial chamber in a location so remote that it wasn't rediscovered until 2016. Why go to such extraordinary effort? Why bury these individuals in ice at high altitude rather than in the valleys where presumable their communities lived? Theory 1. These were members of a ruling elite or priestly caste, and the high-altitude burial represented a symbolic ascent toward the sky or gods, with the purple-dyed shrouds marking their exceptional status. Theory 2. They were victims of an epidemic or plague, and the remote mountain burial was a quarantine measure to prevent contamination of lowland communities, with the purple dye serving an apotropaic function to bind or neutralize dangerous spiritual forces. Theory 3, which makes some epidemiologists uncomfortable, but which the evidence refuses to completely rule out, is that their extraordinary stature and physical development made them dangerous or threatening to normal populations, and the burial was simultaneously honorific and isolating, acknowledging their importance while ensuring they remained permanently separated from living communities. Theory 4. Emerging from recent aDNA analysis, showing these individuals shared unusually high frequencies of alleles associated with height and muscle development, is that we're looking at evidence of Bronze Age selective breeding, a deliberate attempt to create a warrior caste or laborer class with enhanced physical characteristics, buried together when the breeding program ended or when they could no longer be supported. Balkan folklore preserves fragmentary memories that map unsettlingly onto the Durmitor discovery. Serbian and Montenegrin oral traditions speak of the Bijeli Div, the white giants, who lived in the high mountains during the time before iron, who could move boulders that required 10 normal men to shift, and who wore purple cloaks that granted them protection from weapons. The legends claim the white giants were wiped out in a single night when the mountain gods became jealous of their strength and sealed them in ice as punishment for hubris. 19th century ethnographers collected these stories as typical examples of folkloric giant lore, broadly distributed across Indo-European cultures, and assumed to be mythological projections of childhood wonder and anxieties about size and power. The discovery that actual individuals of exceptional stature were indeed buried in ice in the Montenegrin mountains forces a recalibration of how we interpret folklore as potentially garbled historical memory. Picture yourself in that cave chamber, perhaps during late summer of 1450 BCE, when you can still navigate the passages without ice blocking the way. You're part of a group carrying the wrapped bodies of these extraordinary individuals up through the darkness, the purple shrouds catching the flicker of your torches, your shoulders straining under the weight of the bodies and the stone slab. You know these people. Perhaps they were your leaders, perhaps your protectors, perhaps something else entirely. And you know that sealing them in this high, cold place is necessary, though you might not fully understand why. You set them in their circle, the tallest in the center, and you slide the stone slab into place, knowing that ice will claim them. Soon, that they'll remain here frozen and forgotten until the mountain itself crumbles. What did you believe about these giants that made such an elaborate burial necessary? What did you fear they might do if you buried them in the valleys, like everyone else? Recent comparative analysis has identified at least 3 other high-altitude ice burials in the Dinaric Alps, all featuring individuals of exceptional stature, all wrapped in expensive imported textiles, all sealed behind shaped stone slabs in remote caves above 2,000 meters. If this represents a systematic cultural practice rather than isolated incidents, then Bronze Age Balkan societies possessed levels of social stratification, technical climbing capability, and access to luxury trade goods that appear nowhere in the conventional archaeological literature on the region. We still don't know why these individuals were so tall, where they obtained Tyrian purple in quantities sufficient for burial shrouds, why they were interred in ice rather than earth, or what role they played in their communities that justified such extraordinary treatment. The ice preserves their bodies perfectly, down to the expression on their faces, but it cannot preserve the context that would make sense of their presence in these frozen tombs. The Balearic submarine walls off the coast of Mallorca are one of those discoveries that started as an underwater surveying accident and escalated into a full-blown interpretive crisis. In 2015, marine geologists mapping the seafloor topography for a coastal erosion study identified a linear stone structure, running for over 2,800 meters along the seafloor at a depth of 18 to 21 meters, composed of massive limestone blocks, some weighing an estimated 5 tons, arranged in a deliberate wall-like formation with what appear to be regularly spaced buttresses every 40 meters. Initial assumptions placed it as a modern breakwater or coastal defense work, but ceramic finds trapped in the structure's sediment matrix, combined with radiocarbon dating of encrusting organisms, indicated construction sometime between 4000 and 3600 BCE, firmly in the Neolithic period, millennia before the development of Mediterranean maritime architecture. The problem is immediately obvious. At the estimated time of construction, the structure would already have been submerged beneath several meters of water, meaning either our sea level reconstructions for the Western Mediterranean are fundamentally wrong, or someone in the Neolithic built a massive stone wall on the seafloor, or the wall was built on land and subsequently flooded far more rapidly than current geological models predict. The structure's characteristics argue strongly against natural formation. Petrographic analysis shows the limestone blocks were quarried from exposed bedrock 3 kilometers inland, then transported to the coastal location and positioned with their longest axes perpendicular to the shoreline, exactly the orientation you'd choose to resist wave action. The buttress-like projections occur at such regular intervals that random chance is statistically impossible. Someone planned this. Underwater excavation at 3 locations along the wall revealed that the blocks rest on a prepared foundation of smaller stones and packed clay, a construction technique that requires deliberate engineering rather than casual stacking. Most tellingly, the blocks show pecking marks and leverage scars, characteristic of intentional shaping, and several blocks have shallow rectangular depressions on their upper surfaces, probably sockets for wooden posts or beams that have long since decayed, suggesting the wall once supported additional structures. You don't accidentally create 2,800 meters of regularly spaced, foundation-supported, post-socketed stone architecture. So we're left with 3 deeply uncomfortable theories, none of which sits easily with orthodox models. Theory 1. The wall was built on dry land during a period when sea levels were lower, then flooded during a rapid marine transgression event. But this requires either a catastrophic tsunami significantly larger than any documented in Western Mediterranean geology, or a sudden glacial meltwater pulse that contradicts everything we understand about Holocene sea level rise. Theory 2. The wall was deliberately constructed underwater, perhaps using cofferdam technology or working during seasonal low tides, by a Neolithic culture possessing engineering capabilities far beyond anything else documented in the Western Mediterranean at this time. This would make the Balearic Wall the earliest known example of submarine construction by at least 2,000 years, predating even the earliest Phoenician harbor works. Theory 3. Our chronology is wrong, either because radiocarbon dates from marine environments are being skewed by reservoir effects we haven't accounted for, or because the ceramic typologies we're using to date associated material are themselves based on flawed assumptions about when certain pottery styles reached the Balearic Islands. Here's where archaeological evidence collides with Balearic legend in ways that make researchers profoundly uncomfortable. Medieval Catalan chronicles record indigenous traditions about the Fomalhaut giants, a race of builders who lived on the islands before the Great Waters came, and who constructed walls beneath the sea to protect their lands from flooding. The chronicles, written by Christian monks with contempt for pagan superstition, describe these giants as possessing knowledge of tides and seasons and the ability to command stones to stand where they willed them. When marine archaeologists first encountered these texts in Palma's archives during the research phase, they dismissed them as typical mythological embroidery. Then, underwater magnetometry surveys detected at least 2 additional wall structures, similar in construction and orientation to the main Balearic Wall, positioned at slightly different depths and trending roughly parallel to the modern coastline, suggesting a system of multiple defensive or hydraulic barriers. If the Great Waters refer to post-glacial flooding, and if oral tradition somehow preserved a distorted memory of Neolithic coastal engineering across 6,000 years, then we need to radically revise our assumptions about the longevity and reliability of non-literate historical memory. Imagine standing on the Mallorcan coast in 3800 BCE, the wall rising from the beach directly in front of you, its massive stones forming a barrier against storm surges that sweep in from the southwest. You see dozens of workers hauling blocks on wooden rollers, others pecking at the stone with flint tools to shape the surfaces, still others mixing clay and gravel to prepare the foundation for the next section. The work has been going on for years, perhaps decades, coordinated by some authority capable of mobilizing labor and managing food supplies for a large workforce. But the water is rising. You notice it year by year, the winter tide marks creeping higher, the storm waves reaching farther inland. Perhaps the wall is a desperate attempt to hold back the Mediterranean itself, to preserve arable land against the encroaching sea. Perhaps it fails slowly, inexorably, until the community abandons the coast entirely and retreats inland, leaving their monumental wall to sink beneath the waves that it could not stop. Recent studies using side-scan sonar have mapped the full extent of the wall system, revealing that it once enclosed a coastal embayment of approximately 340 hectares, with the inland perimeter now completely buried under coastal sediment. If this embayment was protected by the walls to create farmland or salt pans, then the labor investment represents a landscape engineering project on a scale completely unprecedented for Neolithic Western Mediterranean cultures. Pollen analysis from sediment cores taken inside the enclosed area shows elevated levels of cereal grasses and olive pollen, suggesting intensive agriculture or arboriculture. But these results are difficult to interpret because the cores also show marine diatoms throughout, indicating periodic or permanent inundation. Either people were farming land that was regularly flooded, which is agriculturally illogical, or the flooding happened rapidly enough that terrestrial pollen became mixed with marine sediment in a single depositional event. We still don't know who built the Balearic walls, why they undertook such a massive construction project using Stone Age technology, whether the walls were intended to be submerged, or whether flooding was an unexpected disaster, or what ultimately happened to the culture that invested so much effort in coastal engineering only to see their work vanish beneath the waves. The stones remain massive and mute, arranged in patterns that speak of human intention but refuse to reveal human purpose. The Razgrad Copper Workshop in northeastern Bulgaria represents one of those discoveries where every single excavation season produces evidence that makes the previous season's interpretation obsolete. Initially identified in 2013 during construction of a highway bypass, the site consists of a multi-chambered stone structure built into a limestone hillside, dated through ceramic analysis and radiocarbon to approximately 4500 BCE, the height of the Copper Age in the Balkans. The structure contains what are unambiguously smelting furnaces, ore storage areas, and finished product repositories, making it one of the earliest specialized metallurgical facilities in Europe. But the scale of operation is staggering. Excavators have identified at least 14 furnaces in various states of preservation, with slag heaps containing an estimated 40 tons of copper smelting waste, and a finished goods cache that included 78 copper axes, 44 daggers, 13 elaborate ceremonial mace heads, and over 400 copper beads, all produced at this single location. This is industrial-level production in the 5th millennium BCE, 1,000 years before anything comparable appears in the Near East. The metallurgical analysis creates even deeper puzzles. Electron microscopy and X-ray fluorescence studies show that the Razgrad smiths were not simply hammering native copper or producing the brittle, arsenic-bronze alloys typical of early Copper Age work. They were deliberately creating copper-antimony alloys, with antimony contents ranging from 4 to 8%, a composition that produces a hardened material with working properties approaching true bronze, but using a much lower melting temperature that would be achievable in a simple wood-fired furnace. The problem? Antimony ores are rare in Bulgaria and do not occur anywhere near Razgrad. Lead isotope analysis of the antimony component matches sources in Anatolia, over 800 kilometers to the southeast across the Black Sea. Someone in 4500 BCE was importing specialized ore across significant distances, possessing not only the metallurgical knowledge to recognize antimony's hardening properties, but also the trade networks to obtain it regularly and in quantity. This pushes back the emergence of long-distance metallurgical trade networks by at least 500 years and suggests levels of technical sophistication that upend conventional narratives about Copper Age Europe as consisting of scattered farming communities just beginning to experiment with metalworking. The social organization required to operate the Razgrad workshop raises questions that cut to the heart of how we model prehistoric societies. Experimental archaeology shows that producing the quantity of copper goods found at the site would require a minimum of 30 to 40 full-time specialists working over multiple decades, supported by a much larger population providing food, charcoal, or transport, and other necessities. This implies settlement hierarchies, resource management systems, and specialized labor divisions that archaeologists typically associate with later Bronze Age chiefdoms, not with Copper Age Balkan farmers. Yet survey archaeology in the region around Razgrad shows no evidence of large central settlements or palatial structures. Instead, we find dispersed farming hamlets, none larger than 10 to 15 households, with no obvious indicators of wealth concentration or elite authority. Where are the people who consumed the copper goods? Where are the overseers who organized the production? Where is the political structure that could command resources on this scale? Theory 1. Razgrad was a sacred site, perhaps controlled by a religious sodality or priesthood that operated independently of local political structures, producing copper goods for ritual or ceremonial exchange rather than practical use. The elaborate mace heads and the sheer quantity of beads support this interpretation. These are prestige goods, not utilitarian tools. Theory 2. The workshop was operated by an ethnic specialist group, perhaps itinerant metalworkers who moved seasonally between sites, working for clients across a wide region, something like medieval tinkers or Roma metalsmiths. This would explain why we don't find a corresponding consumer population nearby. Theory 3. Razgrad represents the industrial wing of a now-vanished political entity, perhaps a proto-urban center located elsewhere, whose archaeological signature we haven't yet recognized, with the workshop deliberately positioned near ore sources and fuel supplies, rather than near population centers. Theory 4, which emerges from recent genetic analysis of skeletal material from contemporary cemeteries showing unusual population diversity, is that Razgrad was a multi-ethnic trading entrepot, a meeting ground for groups from across the Balkans and Anatolia, who maintained the site collectively as a neutral ground for exchange and production. Balkan folklore offers its own explanation, though one that archaeologists have been reluctant to take seriously. Bulgarian traditions speak of the metallurgi, the metal men, who lived apart from ordinary people and who could call fire from stone and make the earth yield copper. The legends describe them as a separate tribe who spoke their own language and who were protected by sky gods, who taught them the secrets of the forge. In some versions, the metal men eventually angered the gods with their pride and were destroyed by lightning that melted their workshops and buried their secrets. When excavators at Razgrad discovered, in the deepest furnace chamber, a cache of 9 copper ingots shaped as stylized lightning bolts, each weighing approximately 3 kilograms and showing evidence of having been cast in molds rather than hammered, the dismissal of folklore as mere mythic invention became harder to maintain. Someone at Razgrad was producing symbolic objects linking metallurgy with celestial power, exactly as the legends describe. Picture yourself inside the Razgrad workshop on a winter afternoon in 4500 BCE, the furnaces glowing red in the dim interior, the air thick with charcoal smoke and the acrid smell of smelting ore. You're surrounded by specialists, each performing their role in the complex choreography of copper production, some feeding charcoal to maintain precise temperatures, others manipulating the clay crucibles with long poles, still others hammering cooled ingots on stone anvils. You hear the ring of metal on stone, the roar of the furnaces, the called instructions in a technical jargon you half understand. The ingots accumulating in the finished goods chamber represent wealth beyond anything your farming community can imagine, yet you know that almost none of it will remain here. It will be carried away by traders who arrive at regular intervals, exchanged for antimony ore, food, obsidian, whatever the metalworkers need to continue their work. You're part of something larger than any single community, a network of exchange and specialization that spans the Balkans and reaches into Anatolia, held together by the knowledge of how to transform stone into shining metal. Recent excavations in 2023 have revealed what appears to be an educational or apprenticeship complex adjacent to the main workshop. Smaller furnaces, practice pieces, discarded mistakes, and what may be instructional diagrams pecked into limestone slabs showing the steps of the smelting process. If Razgrad was not just a production facility, but also a training center where metallurgical knowledge was systematically transmitted, then we need to envision a Copper Age institution unlike anything else documented in prehistoric Europe. A technical school, a guild, a knowledge-preserving organization that existed outside normal kin-based social structures. We still don't know where the antimony came from in such quantities, who organized and financed the workshop's operation, where the enormous output of copper goods actually went, or what happened to this sophisticated metallurgical operation. Because by 4000 BCE, the furnaces are cold, the slag heaps abandoned, and the Razgrad workshop vanishes from the archaeological record as abruptly as it appeared, leaving no descendant sites, no indication of where the metalworkers went, and no explanation for why such a successful operation would simply cease to exist. The Ionian shelf anchors present a mystery that is simultaneously deeply material, 47 massive stone anchors resting on the seafloor, and profoundly conceptual, because their existence requires us to rethink what Bronze Age sailors were capable of achieving. Discovered between 2017 and 2021 during systematic sonar mapping of the seabed west of the Greek island of Lefkada, these anchors range in weight from 800 to 1,200 kilograms each, carved from dense, volcanic basalt that outcrops only on the island itself. They're distributed across a roughly circular area spanning 3 kilometers in diameter, at depths ranging from 45 to 60 meters, far deeper than recreational divers can easily reach, which explains why they remained undetected until modern survey technology. Each anchor features 3 carefully drilled holes, 2 near the top for rope attachment and 1 through the center, presumably to reduce weight or to thread additional rigging. The drilling is remarkably precise, showing none of the wandering or false starts you'd expect from hand tools, and petrographic analysis of the drill marks indicates the use of a tubular core drill, possibly made of copper or bronze, working with an abrasive slurry, demonstrating a level of stone-working technology not documented elsewhere in the Bronze Age Aegean. Radiocarbon dating of organic material, probably ship timber fragments, encrusted on several anchors combined with typological comparison of the hole patterns with anchors from excavated shipwrecks, places the Ionian shelf specimens in the late Bronze Age, approximately 1200 to 1050 BCE, the period of widespread Mediterranean collapse. But here's what makes them extraordinary. Anchors of this size and weight are designed for ships significantly larger than any Bronze Age vessel, yet discovered by underwater archaeology. The largest known Bronze Age shipwreck, the Uluburun vessel off the coast of Turkey, carried an anchor weighing approximately 100 kilograms. The Ionian shelf anchors are 10 to 12 times that mass. Applying principles of naval architecture and using the standard ratios between anchor weight and vessel displacement, these anchors would have secured ships of at least 150 to 200 tons burden. roughly the size of a 17th century Spanish galleon or an 18th century East Indiaman. Conventional models of Bronze Age Mediterranean shipbuilding envision vessels rarely exceeding 30 to 40 tons, capable of coasting voyages with frequent beaching, crewed by a dozen men. The Ionian Shelf anchors imply the existence of blue water cargo ships with crews of 50 or more, capable of remaining at sea for extended periods, riding out storms at anchor in deep water rather than running for shelter. No archaeological evidence for ships of this size exists anywhere in the Bronze Age Mediterranean. No ship sheds large enough to construct them, no textual references to such vessels, no depictions in art or murals, no wrecks on the seafloor despite decades of intensive survey. Yet the anchors exist, indisputably real, undeniably Bronze Age, irrefutably designed for massive vessels. Theory 1, we've simply been unlucky, and the giant ships all sank in deep-water locations beyond current survey coverage or degraded completely, leaving no diagnostic remains. Theory 2, the anchors weren't used for normal cargo ships, but for specialized vessels, perhaps ceremonial barges, perhaps military transport ships, perhaps floating platforms used for purposes we can't yet imagine, that were constructed and operated by institutions that left no other archaeological trace. Theory 3, the anchors represent an experimental phase in Mediterranean shipbuilding, an attempt to scale up vessel size that ultimately failed for economic or technical reasons, leaving only the anchors behind as evidence of the attempt. Theory 4, which gains traction from the anchor's distinctive three-hole design, is that they represent a different anchoring technology altogether, perhaps not securing ships at all, but mooring floating structures or buoys, or serving as components in some maritime infrastructure we don't yet understand. The location of the anchor field adds another layer of strangeness. The circular distribution pattern doesn't match any known Bronze Age trade routes or harbors. The nearest significant Bronze Age settlement is Nidri, 16 kilometers to the southeast on Lefkada's east coast. But that site shows no evidence of maritime commerce at the scale the anchors imply. Instead, the anchor field lies directly between the Greek mainland and the Adriatic Sea, positioned where currents and prevailing winds would naturally funnel ships traveling between the Aegean and the Italian coast. If the anchors mark a regular anchorage, a place where ships waited for favorable winds or weather, then we're looking at evidence of an organized, regular maritime traffic between Greece and Italy in the late Bronze Age. Centuries before historians typically place the beginning of Greek colonial voyages westward. Recent ceramic finds on the Italian coast show Greek late Bronze Age pottery much farther west than previously documented, supporting the possibility that the conventional chronology of Mediterranean maritime expansion needs significant revision. Greek legends preserve tantalizing hints that may or may not relate to the anchors. Homer's Odyssey describes the island of Ithaca, usually identified with modern Lefkada, or its neighbor Ithaki, as a major maritime center, home to black ships that could sail to distant lands. The poem mentions the stone anchors of the old ones, contrasted with the contemporary rope and wood anchors, and describes them as relics of an earlier age when ships were larger and voyages longer. Classical commentators interpreted this as poetic invention or nostalgic exaggeration, but the discovery of 47 massive stone anchors precisely in the waters Homer's geography describes forces us to reconsider whether the Homeric poems contain garbled memories of actual Bronze Age maritime practice. Were there truly black ships, significantly larger than anything we've discovered? Were there maritime traditions that vanished during the Bronze Age collapse, preserved only in epic poetry, and now partially confirmed by underwater archaeology? Imagine yourself on the deck of one of these hypothetical giant ships, let's say 100 meters offshore from Lefkada, in the autumn of 1150 BCE. A storm is building from the northwest, the seas already running heavy, and the captain has ordered the anchors dropped, all three of them in succession, each requiring teams of sailors to maneuver over the side and allow to plunge to the seafloor. The ship rides to the anchors as wind screams through the rigging and spray drenches the deck. But the anchors hold, their massive weight and the captain's skill in positioning keeping the ship from being driven onto the rocks. You're carrying cargo from the Aegean, copper ingots, olive oil, fine pottery, bound for trading partners in Italy, part of a maritime network that will collapse within the next generation as the Bronze Age world disintegrates. After the storm, you'll haul the anchors back aboard, the crew straining at the capstan, and continue your voyage. But one day, perhaps this voyage, perhaps the next, something will go catastrophically wrong. The ship will founder, and the anchors will remain on the seafloor for 32 centuries, silent witnesses to a maritime capability that the world will forget even existed. Recent analysis using autonomous underwater vehicles has identified what may be anchor ropes, or at least rope-like impressions in the sediment, trailing from several of the anchors, suggesting they were abandoned suddenly rather than deliberately discarded. If ships at anchor were forced to cut their cables in an emergency, fleeing an approaching enemy, or overwhelmed by a storm, that would explain both the concentration of anchors in a relatively small area and their apparently sudden deposition. We still don't know what size ships actually used these anchors, where those ships were built, what cargoes they carried, where they sailed, or why every trace of this maritime tradition vanished so completely that even the Greeks of the classical period retained only poetic fragments of memory. The anchors lie on the Ionian shelf like scattered quotations from a lost manuscript, each one confirming that something extraordinary existed while simultaneously withholding the context that would allow us to understand what that something actually was. The Thracian labyrinth beneath the modern town of Pernik in western Bulgaria is the kind of discovery that shouldn't exist according to every model of Bronze Age Balkan culture. Revealed by ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted before apartment construction in 2019, the structure consists of an underground complex of at least 63 interconnected chambers and corridors carved directly into the limestone bedrock, extending over an area of approximately 1.4 hectares at depths ranging from 8 to 17 meters below the modern surface. The regular geometry, chambers arranged in concentric rings connected by radial passages with what appears to be a deliberate spiral pattern overall, immediately, suggested intentional design rather than natural cave formation or ad hoc mining. Subsequent excavation of 3 chambers confirmed human modification through tool marks on the walls, ventilation shafts extending to the surface, and deliberately leveled floors. Radiocarbon dating of charcoal from fire pits in the chambers, combined with ceramic finds and a single bronze dagger of distinctive Thracian type, places the complex's active use period around 1350 to 1250 BCE, contemporary with the Late Bronze Age. The purpose of the labyrinth remains entirely opaque. The chambers contain no storage jars, no habitation debris, no metallurgical slag, no burial remains. None of the material signatures that usually allow archaeologists to identify functional uses. What they do contain is extraordinary. The walls of at least 15 chambers are covered with incised geometric symbols, primarily spirals, meanders, and concentric circles, executed with such precision that laser scanning reveals many were likely created using mechanical aids, perhaps compass-like tools or rotating templates, rather than freehand. The symbols show no clear pattern of pictographic representation. They don't depict objects, animals, or people. Instead, they form abstract, repetitive designs that some researchers have compared to Bronze Age Aegean cult symbols, while others see parallels with later Celtic and Germanic geometric ornament. In 3 chambers, the incisions were filled with a red pigment, chemically identified as cinnabar, mercury sulfide, imported from sources at least 300 kilometers distant. The expense and toxicity of cinnabar suggest the pigment had special significance, perhaps magical or ritual. Theory 1. The labyrinth was a ritual complex, possibly associated with chthonic worship or initiation ceremonies, with the spiral design representing symbolic descent into the underworld or transformation of initiates through a structured sequence of experiences. The geometric symbols would then be magical or protective signs, and the cinnabar would serve as a sacred marker of consecrated space. Theory 2. The complex was a refuge or stronghold, designed to shelter populations during periods of conflict, with the spiral design making it difficult for invaders to navigate while allowing defenders familiar with the layout to move quickly. But the absence of storage facilities, water sources, or defensive features makes this problematic. Theory 3. The labyrinth was an astronomical instrument or calendar, with the spiral passages and chambers encoding celestial observations or seasonal markers, and with the incised symbols representing numerical or observational data. Some of the spiral patterns do crudely match lunar cycles, but the correspondence is rough enough that it might be coincidence. Theory 4. Emerging from recent acoustic analysis. The labyrinth was designed to produce specific sound effects, with the geometry of chambers and passages, creating resonances, echoes, and reverberations that would have been acoustically impressive or disorienting, perhaps used in ritual or psychological conditioning. Thracian mythology, as preserved in fragmentary form by later Greek and Roman authors, speaks of the underground kingdom of Zalmoxis, a subterranean realm where initiates spent 3 years in darkness, learning secret wisdom before emerging with prophetic powers. The later Greeks claimed this was a charlatan's trick, that the Thracians simply hid people in underground chambers and then pretended they had returned from the dead. But classical authors also expressed genuine puzzlement about how the Thracians could construct such chambers and how initiates survived underground for extended periods. The Punic labyrinth offers a material correlate to these textual fragments. Yes, the Thracians did construct elaborate underground chambers. Yes, they could support human occupation through ventilation and periodic provisioning. Yes, the disorienting geometry and acoustic properties would create powerful psychological effects on anyone spending significant time within the complex. Whether this amounts to proof of the Zalmoxis cult or simply demonstrates that the Greeks and Thracians both knew about ritual use of underground spaces remains open to interpretation. Picture yourself in the Punic labyrinth in 1300 BCE, having descended through one of the surface shafts into the darkness below. Your only light comes from an oil lamp that casts flickering shadows on the spiral-carved walls. You're following a guide through the passages, turning left, then right, then left again. Losing all sense of direction, the spiral geometry pulling you deeper into the complex. The air smells of damp stone and smoke. You hear voices echoing from other passages, chanting or singing, the sound bouncing off the walls in ways that make it impossible to determine its source. The cinnabar spirals on the walls seem to writhe in your lamplight, red as fresh blood, and you realize you're being deliberately disoriented, stripped of the normal anchors of perception, prepared psychologically for whatever revelation or ordeal awaits in the deepest chambers. This is technology applied not to the material world, but to human consciousness, using space and geometry as tools for transformation. Recent geophysical surveys using electrical resistivity tomography suggest the Punic labyrinth may not be unique. At least 5 other locations in western Bulgaria show similar subsurface anomalies, regular geometric patterns of underground voids at comparable depths, none yet excavated or confirmed, but tantalizing possibilities that the Thracians constructed a network of these complexes across their territory. If true, we'd need to completely revise our understanding of late Bronze Age Thracian society, from mobile pastoralists and small-scale farmers to a culture capable of monumental subterranean architecture, possessing engineering, knowledge sophisticated enough to design stable multi-chamber underground complexes, and maintaining religious or social institutions that required such extraordinary investments of labor. We still don't know who carved the labyrinth, what exactly took place in its disorienting passages, why the geometric symbols were so important that they were filled with expensive toxic pigment, or what happened to the knowledge that allowed Thracians to construct these underground wonders, because by 1200 BCE, the labyrinth appears to have been abandoned, sealed by natural rockfall or deliberate backfilling, and the tradition of underground chamber building vanishes from Thracian culture as completely as it appeared, leaving only the geometric spirals carved into the darkness as testimony to intentions we cannot read. The Epirote mountain cairns, scattered across the Pindus Range in northwestern Greece, present a final mystery that ties together themes of monumentality, memory, and the strange persistence of Bronze Age landscape modifications into the modern era. These are not modest trail markers or burial mounds, but massive stone constructions, the largest measuring over 18 meters in height and 40 meters in diameter at the base, built from hundreds of tons of unshaped limestone boulders piled in roughly conical forms. Systematic survey conducted between 2018 and 2022 has documented 134 of these cairns distributed along high ridgelines at elevations between 1,600 and 2,100 meters, often positioned at locations with exceptional viewshed coverage. You can see for dozens of kilometers in multiple directions from the summit of most cairns. Radiocarbon dating from charcoal inclusions in the cairn interiors, combined with diagnostic pottery fragments from their bases, indicates construction during the Late Bronze Age, approximately 1400 to 1200 BCE, making them contemporary with the Mycenaean Palace civilization in southern Greece, but located in mountainous regions that conventional archaeology characterizes as peripheral and underdeveloped. The labor investment represented by these cairns is staggering. Experimental reconstruction of a medium-sized cairn using traditional stone-moving techniques required a team of 15 people working for 6 months to assemble a structure, measuring 10 meters high and 20 meters in diameter. And that's with modern food security and team coordination. Scaling up to the largest documented cairns and multiplying by 134 structures suggests a cumulative labor investment of tens of thousands of person-hours, organized across a landscape of high mountains where agriculture is marginal and where conventional survey finds only scattered evidence of permanent settlement. Who mobilized this labor? Who coordinated construction across such a wide geographic area? What motivated people to haul limestone boulders up steep mountain slopes to build structures that contain no burials, no dedicatory inscriptions, no obvious functional purpose? The cairn's distribution provides crucial clues while simultaneously deepening the mystery. They're not randomly scattered, but form distinct clusters and chains, with sightlines between cairns, allowing visual signaling from one to another. Archaeoastronomical analysis shows that many cairns align with solstice, sunrise, and sunset positions when viewed from neighboring cairns, suggesting they may have functioned as components in a landscape-scale astronomical observatory or ritual calendar. More intriguingly, the cairn network maps closely onto modern transhuman shepherding routes, the seasonal paths that flocks still follow between winter pastures in the lowlands and summer grazing in the high mountains. If the Bronze Age cairns were originally built as markers for pastoral routes, they represent a level of investment in mobile pastoralism that has no parallel in Mediterranean archaeology. These would be monuments to movement, to the seasonal rhythms of herding life, constructed at a scale usually reserved for sedentary agricultural societies. Theory 1. The cairns were territorial markers, boundary stones writ large, defining the grazing rights or political control of competing pastoral groups, with the monumentality serving as a deterrent to encroachment and a statement of power. Theory 2. They were ritual sites, possibly associated with mountain cults or sky gods, with the elevation and visibility making them appropriate locations for ceremonies that required witnesses or celestial observation. The lack of altar features or obvious cultic equipment is problematic for this interpretation, but absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Organic materials and perishable offerings would have vanished millennia ago. Theory 3. The cairns were navigational aids, marking safe routes through dangerous terrain or signaling locations of water sources, shelter, or hazards, with the monumental scale necessary to remain visible in winter snow or summer heat haze. Theory 4, which seems increasingly plausible as more cairns are documented, is that they served multiple functions simultaneously: territorial marker and ritual site and navigation aid, and that trying to assign them a single purpose misunderstands how Bronze Age people integrated practical and symbolic dimensions of landscape use. Epirote folklore, collected by Greek ethnographers in the early 20th century, preserves stories about the cairns that local shepherds called dragon houses, or giants' graves. The legends claimed they were built by the Titans, the race of giants who ruled before the Olympian gods, and that they marked places where the Titans were imprisoned beneath the mountains by Zeus. Shepherds traditionally left small stones on the cairns when passing, adding incrementally to their bulk, and believed that removing stones would bring catastrophic storms or illness. This folk tradition of adding stones has continued into the 21st century, meaning the cairns have been modified continuously for at least 3,000 years, with modern contributions making it extremely difficult to determine their original Late Bronze Age forms. The folkloric association with giants and imprisonment creates an unsettling resonance with the actual archaeological evidence. Yes, these are structures built on a scale that suggests superhuman effort. Yes, they dominate the landscape in ways that speak of power and constraint. Yes, they've continued to accumulate stones through millennia of folk practice that doesn't understand their original purpose, but preserves a sense that they're important, dangerous, and worthy of respect. Picture yourself as a Bronze Age shepherd in 1300 BCE, driving your flock up into the summer pastures as your people have done for generations. You follow the routes your parents taught you, and the routes are marked, impossibly monumentally marked, by cairns so massive that you couldn't dismantle one in a lifetime of labor. You add your stone to the cairn as you pass, a gesture of respect or propitiation, not entirely certain why you do it, but knowing that it's necessary, that the cairns are tied to the order of things, to the seasonal cycles that govern your life, to the mountains themselves. Later peoples will call them dragon houses or titans' graves, and later still archaeologists will survey them with laser scanners and debate their function in journal articles. But you know them simply as the markers, the boundary stones of your world, the permanent features against which the transient patterns of your pastoral life unfold. Recent LiDAR surveys covering the entire Pindus Range have revealed at least 200 additional cairn-like features, many in remote locations never previously surveyed, suggesting the Bronze Age monument building tradition in these mountains was far more extensive than anyone suspected. If even a quarter of these features prove to be late Bronze Age constructions, we're looking at the largest concentration of monumental architecture in prehistoric Greece outside the major palace centers, built not by sedentary agricultural populations, but by mobile pastoralists, invested not in cities or palaces, but in marking and memorializing the landscape itself. We still don't know who organized the cairn building, what social or political structures made such investments possible, why monument construction stopped abruptly after 1200 BCE with no subsequent Bronze Age additions, or what meanings these massive stone piles held for the people who built them and the shepherds who continued to add stones for 3,000 years afterward. The cairns stand on their mountain ridges, accumulating stones and stories, permanent features of a landscape that has seen empires rise and fall while the cairns endure, outlasting every historical certainty, except the certainty that humans once decided these particular piles of stones mattered enough to build them, on a scale that still astonishes us today. So here we are, having walked through laser-scanned villages sealed from within, submerged platforms scored with inexplicable grooves, ice tombs containing purple-wrapped giants, submarine walls built before the seas rose, industrial copper workshops in the Neolithic, anchors for ships that shouldn't have existed, underground labyrinths carved in spiral patterns, and mountain cairns marking routes that shepherds still follow. 8 mysteries, 8 windows into a Bronze Age world that refuses to behave according to the tidy narratives we've constructed about humanity's gradual progress from primitive simplicity to modern complexity. What ties these disparate discoveries together isn't a unified conspiracy or a single lost civilization. That would actually be easier to process than the truth. What ties them together is the recurring demonstration that Bronze Age peoples across the Mediterranean and Balkans possessed capabilities, knowledge systems, and social organizations that consistently exceed our models, that force us to revise our assumptions, and that remind us how much of the ancient world remains irretrievably lost. The Kalivos villagers who sealed their homes so carefully, the Cypriot engineers who built geometric platforms in the sea, the Balkan communities who buried their giants in ice, the Mallorcan builders who tried to wall out the rising Mediterranean, the Bulgarian metalsmiths who imported antimony from Anatolia, the mariners who anchored massive ships in the Ionian Sea, the Thracians who carved spiral labyrinths into bedrock, the Epirot shepherds who built cairns visible for miles. All of these people lived rich, complex lives within cultures that made sense to them, that had internal logics and value systems and technologies we can only glimpse through the fragmentary evidence they left behind. They weren't primitive versions of us, fumbling toward modernity. They were fully realized human societies adapted to their specific environmental and historical contexts, and the fact that we can't understand everything they did doesn't reflect poorly on them. It reflects accurately on the limits of archaeological knowledge and the humility we should bring to interpreting the past. What's profoundly unsettling about these mysteries isn't that they exist. Every period of human history contains puzzles and unresolved questions, but that they become more mysterious the more we investigate them. LiDAR reveals sealed villages that conventional survey missed entirely. Metallurgical analysis shows Bronze Age copper alloys that shouldn't be possible with the technology we thought they had. Underwater archaeology finds anchors for ships that no one built, or at least that no one left any other trace of building. DNA analysis shows selective breeding of giants who get buried in ice with imported purple shrouds. Each advance in our scientific capabilities, each new analytical tool, each expanded survey. These don't clarify the picture, they complicate it. The past recedes as we approach it, like trying to grab smoke, and we're left with increasingly detailed descriptions of phenomena we understand less and less. This is where folklore and oral tradition demand serious consideration, not as literal truth, but as potential repositories of distorted historical memory. The sealed villages of the giants, the tide watchers who built starstones, the white giants in purple cloaks, the great waters that drowned ancient walls, the metal men who called fire from stone, the prophets who spent 3 years underground, the dragon houses built by titans. These stories were dismissed as myth and superstition until archaeology started finding material correlates. Not exact matches, not confirmations of the supernatural elements, but enough correspondence to suggest that communities preserved memories of actual events and capabilities across millennia, embedded in narrative frameworks that protected the memories while transforming their meanings. When Bulgarian shepherds add stones to cairns their ancestors built 3,000 years ago, they're participating in a tradition whose origins and purposes they've forgotten, but whose importance they still recognize. That's cultural memory operating at timescales that dwarf written history. The technological sophistication revealed at these sites should also give us pause. Copper antimony alloys in the 5th millennium BCE, precision stone drilling for massive anchors, underground complexes carved with geometric patterns using probable mechanical guides, marine construction or land-based construction before rapid flooding, tubular core drilling, selective breeding programs, long-distance ore trade networks. These aren't the technologies of simple farming communities just beginning to explore metalworking or maritime capabilities. These are the technologies of societies with specialist knowledge, institutional memory, educational systems for transmitting technical information across generations, and political organizations capable of mobilizing resources for large-scale projects. Yet these societies appear in the archaeological record suddenly, operate for periods measured in centuries, then vanish or transform so completely that subsequent cultures in the same regions show no continuity with their predecessors' capabilities. Bronze Age knowledge was volatile, apparently, subject to loss and disruption in ways that challenge our assumptions about technological development as a linear, cumulative process. Perhaps most importantly, these mysteries remind us that the ancient world was genuinely strange, genuinely different from our own in ways that go beyond surface-level cultural differences. When Bronze Age people sealed an entire village and vanished, they weren't performing an action that maps neatly onto modern categories of behavior: migration, religious movement, political reorganization. When they built geometric platforms and scored them with grooves, they weren't creating something whose function we can easily intuit by analogy with modern or historical precedents. When they carved spiral labyrinths and filled the incisions with toxic mercury compounds, they weren't doing something that archaeological theory has prepared us to interpret. The strangeness is real, not just a gap in our evidence, and acknowledging that strangeness is more intellectually honest than forcing Bronze Age behavior into interpretive frameworks developed for understanding modern or recent historical societies. What these 8 mysteries demand from us is a particular kind of epistemic humility, not the false modesty that says we can't know anything, but the genuine recognition that there are questions archaeology cannot currently answer, that the ancient world contains human possibilities we haven't yet imagined, that the evidence sometimes contradicts our best models without offering clear alternatives. The LiDAR revealed village is sealed. The submarine platforms are carved with grooves. The giants are wrapped in purple and frozen in ice. The walls stand beneath the waves. The copper antimony alloys are refined beyond expected capability. The massive anchors wait on the seafloor. The spiral labyrinths are empty. The cairns accumulate stones. And all of these facts are simultaneously certain and inexplicable. We know they're there. We can measure and date and analyze them, but we cannot yet say definitively what they mean or what stories they're trying to tell us. So where does this leave you, the viewer who spent the last hour touring these mysteries? Hopefully with a sense that the past is not dead and buried, not fully excavated and cataloged, not reducible to simple narratives about human progress or decline. The past is alive in the evidence it left behind, in the questions it continues to pose, in the way it resists our attempts to fully comprehend it. Every sealed doorway, every scored platform, every frozen giant, every submerged wall, every copper ingot, every stone anchor, every carved spiral, every mountain cairn is an invitation to wonder, to imagine, to recognize that human beings have always been capable of more than we give them credit for. The Bronze Age peoples of the Mediterranean and Balkans weren't waiting for history to begin. They were living their own histories, building their own monuments, solving their own problems, creating their own meanings, and leaving behind traces that we're still learning to read. Keep digging, keep questioning, keep wondering, because some secrets still lie just beneath your feet, waiting for the right technology or the right perspective or the right question to bring them into the light. The Aegean highlands hold more sealed villages. The Mediterranean seafloor conceals more platforms and anchors. The mountain ice preserves more bodies. The copper workshops hide more evidence of forgotten technologies. The limestone bedrock contains more spiraling chambers. The high ridges bear more cairns. We've barely begun to understand what Bronze Age peoples were capable of achieving, what they knew and forgot, what they built and abandoned. And maybe, just maybe, the folklore isn't entirely wrong. The legends preserve kernels of truth. The giants did walk among us in some form we haven't yet recognized, and the ancient world was stranger, more sophisticated, more mysterious than any academic model has prepared us to imagine. The evidence is there, patient and persistent, waiting for us to develop the tools and the courage to see it clearly. The mysteries endure, and so does the human impulse to solve them, generation after generation, century after century, adding our stones to the cairns our ancestors built, and trusting that somewhere in the accumulation of evidence and interpretation, meaning will eventually emerge.